Hi everyone, good evening or good morning sa mga from the other side. Hi Boyang. So we'll give others a few more minutes before we start. So good evening. Hello to Bangkok viewers. So maybe grab a drink or do whatever you have to do. I hope you've already eaten dinner. And then we'll start in a few minutes. If you still have friends who are willing to join, send them the link or add them to the invite so that they can find this so that we can start in a few minutes. Hello, South Korea. Hello, hello. Okay, so I think yung mga nasa chat na, you're very much aware of the functionality. So we'll continue to use the chat functionality for the rest of the stream. Again, we're saying this is our first live stream. So hopefully no technical glitches happen. If they do happen, we will just wing it. So session for tonight will be done in English and in Tagalog. So Taglish, I will try my best to explain and answer your questions as best as I can. If we have other unique questions that are not related to the topic, I'll make sure to take note of them and then we'll probably answer them in next stream or maybe a dedicated video. So just keep those questions coming. We'll take note and then we'll see what we can do. Hello, hello. Okay, I'm seeing a few more people join. Hello, April Joy. Hello, Albert. Hi everyone. So we'll probably start around 8:05 Philippine slash Singapore time, whatever time that is for you. I hope you are ready. We have around 3 more minutes, so I already have water beside me. So if you need anything to keep you hydrated and energized for the next hour or so, feel free to prepare that, and then we'll start in a bit. Ilonggo mahirap, boyang. There's very limited audience that can understand. So, Tagalog English tayo today with an Ilonggo accent. So, we'll see. We're seeing a few more people join. So, welcome, welcome. We have 32 viewers as of now. So, thanks for joining. We'll start in a bit. I hope you have questions in store or at least coming here with an open mind. We'll try to cover the basics of investment, sorry, just in a short while, mga 2 more minutes, and then we'll get started. Hello, hello. I'm seeing new people join the chat. Julius, hello. And Aldrin from Olongapo. Welcome to the live stream. Thanks for joining. We'll start in about a minute. Just giving a few more folks to set up. I know may lag ata konti. Some people are telling me over Facebook. So hopefully that does not ruin the stream. We'll start very, very soon. Walang pa Jollibee. I love it. If there is a Jollibee near you, you can order. But walang pa Jollibee. Maybe in the future stream, Boya. If that ever reaches your side of the world. Okay, I think we have most of the folks join. Anyway, we'll start with a few logistics. So very simple stuff. What you'll see, you're already very familiar with the live chat. If you're on desktop mode, it will be towards the right hand side of the screen that you will see. So just use that. If you are on mobile, the chat will be at the bottom part. So hanapin nyo lang yung chat. The chat will enable you to interact with me. I see a lot of people already commenting and reacting. So if you have questions, I can see them on screen. So sorry if yung mata ko hindi nakafix sa camera. I will try to manage as best as I can. And then also, we will not be able to cover all of the topics today. So if you can, please subscribe to the channel. We cover personal finance videos on other topics. So if there are some topics na medyo blockbuster yung questions, we might just create a dedicated video for it. Right? So I think all of you are familiar with the live chat. This is the only way you will interact with me today to keep it simple. So if you have questions, just raise them and I may just flash them on screen. Hello to my parents. So nag-comment na sila and ready na daw sila. So let's get this started. Okay, so as the invite said, you are joining the first ever version of what I call the revenue stream. So for those people who got the pun, this is the live stream of the Peso Pro episodes. The intent is to talk about personal finance in a more detailed way. When we launched this about 6 weeks ago, we actually found that a lot of people had follow-up questions to the videos, and that's very understandable because the videos typically take around 10 to 15 minutes lang. So ang hirap i-explain lahat-lahat, even if we try to actually come up with the topics and really prepare for them, right? So the live stream, I call it the revenue stream because as we all build our paths towards financial independence, what we really want to do is to also build revenue, so more income, so that we can reach our goals faster. But the way to build that sustainably is to build knowledge and try to equip ourselves with other information and skills that will help us get to where we want to be in the future. So today, we wanted to start this hopefully series of live streams if you like it. So please feel free to comment that if you feel this format is helpful for you. We'll try to make it regular. But today we're gonna start with investments 101. This will be a basic live stream for all the investment, and then I'll try to capture a lot of time for Q&A. So let's get started. Okay. So just a couple more so that you're guided and you can manage your time and your way at your own home or wherever you may be. I saw one person said na nasa quarantine daw. So hopefully this is good use of your quarantine time. But the outline is we're gonna use the next 90 minutes or so for the following topic. So we'll cover the basics of why do you even need to invest and really talk about the power of investing, kung bakit ba siya pinag-uusapan lagi, but not all of us actually do it. And then we're gonna go into more practical next steps. So before you actually go to investing, what do you have to think about? Ano ba yung mga options mo? And I'm pretty sure if you are a young adult like me, marami nang present ng mga kung ano-ano sa inyo by now. And all of those can be confusing. So we're gonna talk about the most common, most basic things that you will typically see and then try to weigh one from another. And then towards the end, we're gonna cover some next steps of what you can personally do. And then of course, we're allot time for Q&A. So again, utilize the live chat so that I can answer those questions. I'll prompt you when we're gonna have time for Q&A. But if you have things that are very urgent on the topic that you want to clarify, just feel free to comment that down below. I can actually see your comments. So hi, Ila from South Korea. Welcome to the stream. Okay, let's get started. Okay. The first thing about this whole topic is answering the question of why. And typically, I think if you probably ask friends na nag-i-invest, they would probably give you an answer along the lines of these three answers. One is to really beat inflation, which means na if we don't invest, our peso today actually has less purchasing power in the future. Meaning, let's just take, for example, the very basic example of rice, right? So, for example, yung isang kilo ng bigas ngayon is call it 40 pesos, right? I'm not very sure how much the kilo of rice is right now. But let's say it's 40 pesos. typically, as the prices of goods increase, next year or 2 years from now, that will likely become 42, 43, or even 45 pesos, depende kung ano nangyari sa inflation. However, when you earn your income, some of us get increases na hindi at the same pace ng inflation. So meaning, yung peso na hinahawakan mo today, let's say you have 100 pesos in your wallet, if you keep your peso in your wallet at hindi mo siya gagalawin after 2 years, you can buy less things with that peso. I think this one, most of us are able to grasp, right? The second one is a bit more intangible. Meaning, when people tell you, oh, we invest to achieve our financial goals, this is where typically we lose the understanding kung bakit ba talaga tayo kailangan mag-invest. Traditional knowledge tells us that we have to save, meaning our parents or even our teachers all taught us na, oh sige, kailangan mag-save tayo ng kaunti out of our income or whatever, right? Para hindi natin ubusin and then we save for the future. But in terms of achieving financial goals, savings is just one part of it, and in most cases, hindi siya actually enough for you to deliver on the financial goals that you may have. The last one is financial security, which is tied to the financial goals, but really this is more towards retirement and thinking about paano ba ako eventually kung hindi na ako magtatrabaho. So these are the most common reasons why people invest. Now, let's do a quick poll though for the number of you who are still in the chat. The question to you is, now that you understand this, right? When you think about your behavior towards investing, which of the options here on screen are you? So, meron tayong A, actively ka nag-invest. So, this is typically about 20 to 30% or more of your income. B is you do this but partial lang. So, for example, naglagay ka lang somewhere, nakalimutan mo na, hindi siya substantial amount because nakalimutan mo na. So, typically, you are just in and out of investing, hindi talaga very deliberate. Or C, hindi ka talaga nag-i-invest. So, maybe you never learned or never tried doing it. So, if you can answer that in the chat box below, that would be great. So, I'm seeing B, A. So, for the A's, very, very good, right? I assume that you are contributing at least 20 to 30% of your income, very aggressive. Ano pa ba yung ginagawa nyo? Paiba-iba siya in terms of your portfolio. But for the others who are choosing B or C, you're actually a bit more on the aloof side towards investment. That does not mean that it's bad. The thing is, the good part is that you actually know where you are, right? I'm getting a question of, does insurance count, right? So the answer to that question is really, does your insurance even come with investments, right? Because there are investments or insurance policies that are only insurance policies at wala siyang kasamang investment. So be sure to check. If you are unsure, I'm pretty sure you're in the letter B range at the maximum. Okay, I'm getting a lot more answers. So my B, my C, and all of us are gonna be in different places, and that's fine. In this stream, we're gonna answer some of the things na commonly asked, right? On why are you where you are right now? So let's go to the next. Typically, I ask about maybe 15 friends na hindi masyado, na nasa B or C range. Right? And the most common answers I got are these four. And I'm probably thinking those who answered B and C are more or less here, right? Una is, natakot ako dahil pwede akong mawalan ng pera. So, especially for those who have been aware or been nakita yung nangyari noong 2008, 2009 to the US crash, right? Where the stock market literally just crashed and collapsed on itself. So, dun, you can really lose money, right? That's the number one fear of most people. The other one is, hindi ko lang alam kung paano to gawin, right? Some people who may actually be answering B and C actually might be investing pero hindi kayo aware na investment na pala yun, right? So that's another thing that can be taken into consideration when you think about this. The other one is that the stock market scares me. some people really equate investing with the stock market. And towards the later part of the stream, we're gonna answer that hindi naman kailangan na sa stock market yung pera mo to actually start investing and realizing the power of investments. Right? And the last one, which I think is the most common answer that I got from my friends, or at least in my circles, is I don't have the time, so masyadong busy sa work, or I don't have the resources, wala akong ganun kalaking pera para i-invest. I barely have enough to live on what I'm earning. Right? So this is a big problem, because if you don't have spare, then you don't have anything to invest actually. So very common. I hope I won't ask you which ones you relate to, but I'm assuming for those who are in B or C, most often and more likely than not, you will actually be in one of these four categories. So just keep that in mind. What I want you to take away from this slide is basically, hindi kayo nag-iisa. And I actually was in this place just about maybe 6 to 8 years ago, before I really took a deliberate step to understand how investments work. And I'm gonna share with you what changed my mind. Right? We're getting a question on why 20 to 30% from Kat. I will get back to that question in the later slide. Okay, let's go. What I wanted to share with you, if you leave this stream with anything, maybe just one lesson, right, from all of the things that we're going to talk about, what I really want to cover is the power of investing, right? So let's talk about what the power of investing is, so that we can understand what we are here for, and then how do we unlock it. So let's take a very good example, right? And I think baka tumatanda na ako, yung circles ko are now talking about retirement and no longer traveling the world, or that can be a COVID thing, na hindi tayo makatravel, so hindi natin siya pinag-uusapan. That can be also true. But let's think about comfortable retirement, right? Think about maybe at age 60 or even earlier than that, right? I know of a friend who is in the stream right now who wants to retire from her job by age 42 to 45, right? Very good. So, a lot of people now actually want to do early retirement. Before, the conventional wisdom is we will really retire at age 60 or 65, because that's the time that the government will give us pension, etc., etc. That's just how things were done. But now you're gonna hear of a movement that's actually pushing the boundaries of retirement and trying to target na pwede ka nang mag-stop working by the age of 40 to 50, right? So, sabi ni Chai, gusto na niyang mag-retire. Like, who doesn't want, right? To live a life that you're no longer tied to your income, na kailangan mong gawin the job, even if you love the job, right? Having the retirement security that you will have enough money to live off whatever you have in assets until you technically die, is a powerful thing. Right? So think about that, and let's go to how do we unlock the power of investing in relation to retirement first as a concept. Right? May nakita kong Hermes questions. I will very deliberately ignore for now. So let's go. So think about the most common retirement things. And if you actually consult with a personal finance planner, what they will tell you is, if you are age 30 today and you probably want to retire by age 60, for example, right? The typical retirement that you need is about 30 to 40 million pesos. That means that by age 60, you have to have this money set aside, nag-earn siya for yourself, so that it will passively earn the income that you would need to survive. Remember, by the time you are 60 years old, if you are 30 right now, magkano na siguro yung kilo ng bigas, right? It can probably be 100 pesos already, kasi 30 years from now pa yon. So think about that, and this is the average. Obviously, it will change depending on where you are. If you are in South Korea or in Bangkok, those are two very different countries. So the cost of living can be very different for you. But let's just take the average, 30 to 40 million. And if we think about comfortably retiring, the goal is that by age 60, meron tayong 30 million in an investment somewhere that's gonna earn us the money that we need so that we can live off it for the rest of our lives. Right? if you compute that you're gonna save that money on your own without investing, you're actually gonna need roughly about 83,000 pesos per month na i-save mo from age 30 to age 60 para marating mo yun. Now, that may be doable for some people who have businesses or maybe have very, very good paying jobs. But 83,000 per month is still very, very steep even for middle managers or even higher level managers, because we're talking 83,000 to na really set aside. Hindi pa to kasama yung mga daily living expenses mo. Right? So, that's what you need to do to be able to comfortably retire. Now, having that in mind, then maybe you're gonna tell me, so, paano na to PPE? Hindi na to pala doable, right? So, si Kuya earlier smiling in the yacht, doing the cruise can probably be just a dream. And the reality is, most of us won't have enough for retirement. And this is where I want to illustrate that, because all hope is not lost, right? What we are talking about in terms of the power of investing is really something called compound interest. Some of you may have heard of this, but some of you may have heard of it from a different angle. Typically, and I've asked this also from a few friends, and that's why I decided to include this in the topic. When we talk about compound interest, what you can think about is a loan. Typically, when banks advertise compound interest, they will tell you na, oh, pag hindi ka nagbayad, or if pinatagal mo to, the interest actually compounds and you're gonna pay more fees, right? The reverse of it though is also true. When we think about compound interest, you have to think about it in a way that it's really interest earned on interest previously earned. So what does that mean? The graph sort of illustrates this, right? Where in year one, you actually earn interest on your money. And then in year two, even if you don't put in more money, you will earn interest on both the money that you put in year one and the interest na in-earn na yun. So, let's go to the next slide. And this wouldn't be a personal finance live stream if there's no math involved. So, for those who do not like math, I will give you a pop quiz. So let's just say, for example, and for those who like math, and I see a lot of office mates who are in the finance field, so hopefully you help me with this by answering the next few questions, right? So let's just take, for example, a very, very basic case of compound interest, right? So on January 1, 2021, for example, nagka 13th month bonus ka ng December, nung pumasok yun, may 100,000 pesos ka, you place that into to an instrument that will earn you 10% per year. Okay. Forget the taxes for now para mas madali. Hindi na tayo mag-withholding tax in this question. My question is then, after 1 year, how much is the ending balance of your investment by the end of 1 year? So by January 1, 2022, how much will that be? So I'm hoping na may brave souls who will answer this. This is very, very easy for those who are in the finance field. For those who are not, nafe-feel ko na yung struggle because I'm already seeing comments from from various people that you will probably see on screen. Right? So just very, very easy. For those who can answer this, how much is the actual value of your investment after 1 year? 10%. Right? No takers. I will show the answer in just a few more seconds. Right? So, there's an answer. So, see, it's not so bad. Philippines. Right? So, it's not so bad. That's about 110,000. Okay, Ria got it correct also. Right? So, by the end of 1 year, you're gonna end up with 110,000. Great answer. Right? Now, let's take this one more year. Right? On year 2, January 1, 2023, how much is your ending balance after that second year, right? So if you see Philia answering 110, Ping, you can answer this very easily. So I am counting on you to answer this next question. So on the end of year 2, let's say you earn another 10% at the end of year 2. What will that ending balance be? Let's say wala kang dinagdag, it's the same money, nakalimutan mo lang. Pasok sa next round. That's correct. So, year number 2, what is your ending balance by Jan 1, 2023? I'm gonna give a few seconds for you to try to answer. Great. Okay. Thanks, Ria, for that, right? By the end of year two, you actually get 121,000. And so now, while it's a bit small, you actually see the impact of compounding interest, right? On year two, you're no longer earning 10,000, you're now earning 11,000. So, pasok ulit sa next round, right? Kung sino man yan. Hindi ko alam kung si Michael tong isang user. So, now let's do something a bit harder, right? Now, let's take this now a bit farther away. Let's say you continue the same trend. What is the number at the end of 10 years? Right? So, continue lang, same principal amount, and now I'm gonna give you a bit more time to answer this because this will probably require a few more computations. But at the end of the 10th year, right, this yellow cell right here, what is your ending balance if you continue this? No incremental deposits, meaning kung ano lang yung nilagay mo, nakalimutan mo lang for 10 years. And it just kept earning money for you. Okay? I'm gonna give maybe a few seconds for those who are probably still in their calculators, trying to compute this. For those who are in your laptops, you can easily Google future value calculator. But let's say 10% lang per year, no fluctuations. What is the ending balance for this type of investment? What will happen to your investment 10 years from now? Okay, let's give ourselves 30 seconds to answer this. So I have time on the screen. For those who have their answers already, it's okay to try. If they are wrong, I will just deliberately not mind them and delete them. Hindi ko ilalabas sa hindi ko ilalabas sa screen. So that should be an incentive for you guys to try and answer this. May mga violent reactions na po on on the math. Right? So, one more second. Okay. No answer, but I hope that if sinunod nyo to at tinuloy-tuloy nyo yung computation, you'll actually arrive at 259,000, right? So, that's gonna be your future value at the end of 10 years. And yes, may pa-timer tong live stream na to. Which really means, right, that if you would think about it, conventional wisdom, or some people would actually even answer that you would just earn 100,000 on the 100,000 that you gave. Because essentially, my 10 years, I think the 10%, so you're gonna get 100% of your investment. But in reality, what you're gonna earn at the end of 10 years is actually 160%, right? So you can see in the interest column, so you have it. So Aldrin, thank you for doing the math, right? And we actually have the same answer. What you will almost the same answer. Sorry, I think it depends on if it's start of the period or end of the period, but that's fine. Um, but what you have here is basically you're gonna see that the interest that you are earning on the money is actually increasing every year kahit wala kayong ginagawa. Right? So if kahit yung gagawin mo lang is maglagay ka ng pera, hayaan mo siya for 10 years, what it actually does is every year it earns a bit more than the previous year because you are earning on top of what the interest na nag-accumulate na will be for you in the next few years, right? So that's the power of compounding interest. And so now, if you really think about the retirement question, right? Earlier may nagsabi that we're gonna ask for an 83,000 raise. I hope that that's gonna be as simple as that. Pero wala pa akong nakita na nangyari yan right there and then. But now knowing the power of investing and compounding, now you really don't have to save 83,000 pesos per month on your own. Now you only really have to save 32,000 per month, let's say on a 6% per year return, right? And Boyang has a very, very good question that is actually in time for this slide. The question is, may institution ba talaga na nagbibigay ng 10% interest? The answer is, if you're thinking about it from a bank deposit standpoint, no. But there are other investments that can get you the return of 10% per year, which we're gonna talk about in the next few slides. So I'm gonna hold this and I'm gonna remember this question was asked. So essentially, the message that I have as of this slide is, when we think about investing, isipin nyo siya na parang yung pera mo, katuwang mo in reaching the goal, right? If you were just thinking of saving, meaning if you take the conventional approach of iipunin ko lang to, ilalagay ko sa, for example, sa piggy bank, or ilalagay ko siya sa envelope, or ilalagay ko siya sa bank even, right? Banks right now in the Philippines are giving 0.10% per year gross of withholding tax, right? Which is essentially nothing. Pinaganda lang nila na may 0.10% pa. Right? There are other banks that will give you 4%. We have a video on that on the digital bank. So if you are interested in that, you can go check that out. But essentially, if you don't invest the money, you're gonna be on your own, and you have to really keep saving an 83,000 per month to reach that 30 million by age 60. Now, if you put this into an investment that gives you only 6%, right? Not even the 10% that we were computing earlier. If you have the 6% per year, now you're down to like less than half of what you need to save. And this is the power of compounding that we all have to unlock, so that, number one, ma-reach natin actually yung goal, so that hindi na siya nakaka-stress at masyadong mataas pakinggan. But also, so that as time goes by, hindi ka nag-iisa sa journey mo towards your financial goals. And your money is actually earning money for you. So, that's the power of compounding. Now knowing that, right? Knowing that if you invest, you actually have more chances to reach your goal because natutulungan ka ng power of compounding. Before you actually invest, though, this is a good reminder for all of us who are doing investing on the side or are still learning about it, right? And so I created an abbreviation or an acronym so that it's easier to follow, right? So before you actually invest money, the advice is that you think about PHP, so Philippine Peso para madali. Right? First is you think about the purpose. And I think most of us, when we invest, typically, gusto lang natin na mag-invest for investment's sake. And I heard this from a lot of people also because when you think about investment, right, number one, sumisikat siya ngayon. You hear the likes of Bitcoin, or you hear the likes of eToro or mga Call Financial. And even now, may mga new wave investments of Seed In or Flint, which is all crowdfunding sites in the Philippines that you can actually invest money on lending or real estate, right? What have you. All of these are now popping up, which is brilliant because now investing has never been easier. And actually, a lot of these institutions now opened up their platforms to be done from the comforts of your home, right? A few weeks ago, we were talking about the Pag-ibig MP2 na pwede mo na siyang gawin ngayon in a branchless way. So you never have to go to the Pag-ibig branch, which can be very, very tiring and also very, very dangerous kasi the pandemic is still out and about. But now, you can actually do this from your house and actually start investing within just a couple of minutes as long as you follow the right steps. Now, when we talk about investments, it's very important to learn what the purpose is because the purpose is gonna drive what kind of investments you're gonna put it in, right? So for example, earlier, there's a question of why do we suggest for people to actually invest 20 to 30% of their income towards retirement? And the answer in that is essentially when you think about the purpose, meaning retirement in this case, the goal of that fund typically is in the range that if you invest 20 to 30%, you're gonna have more likelihood na may hit mo yung retirement goal mo. There's an actual math around it, but that's the general rule of thumb. Obviously, that can change depending on what kind of retirement do you want, and also depending on the risk appetite that you need. But when we say purpose, for example, um, it can be saving up for a house if you're still renting, for example, or if you're living in say, a smaller place and you want to invest in a house because your family is growing. It can be education of kids or your own education. It can be wedding costs for some na nagpaplano na magpakasal. All of these kinds of things, right? Can be retirement or other milestones. Some people actually say save money or invest money for a future worldwide trip or something, right? So that the purpose can be very different, but it can be very very relevant to you para maintindihan mo what are you actually doing it for. Now, what I'm gonna say is every person will probably have a lot of different purposes for investing, and this is what we typically forget, right? Now, when we think about a purpose, parang okay, naka-invest na ako, okay na lahat, right? Which is also good because it's a good first step. But really remember that if you are investing without a purpose, it's just a bit better than not investing at all. The reason for that is because if wala ka talagang purpose, you're never gonna know if you have enough money sitting there or if you're even doing the right things or baka nilalagay mo lang yan in a different instrument that's not gonna earn you the rate of return that you expect from it, right? Or worse, hindi mo naiintindihan kung ano pinaglalagyan mo ng pera. So for example, Kat was saying, Ethereum or Tesla stocks, right? If you don't know how these different investments actually work, then you can actually be hurting yourself in the long term, and that's really really a bad thing to do. So what we really want to do is understand purpose first. Now the second one is horizon, or really time horizon, right? Or the timing when you need it. So at least Shell is like on the dot on the question, right? Very very timely question. The question on number two is really when do you need it. So when you're asking about recommended investment platforms per age, I think the flip side of this is it really depends on what and when do you need the item, right? I wouldn't say per age, but I think, for example, let's make it simple, right? If you are in your 20s or 30s, you're probably either a young professional starting out in your career, probably no kids yet in the general sense, or the kids are very, very small, so wala pang major education costs, right? So in general, you actually have a lot of time to invest. So the options for you will be very different for a person who is in their late 40s or even 50s and 60s. Kasi you don't have the luxury of time to invest anymore, right? So we're gonna talk about investment platforms in a bit, but I'm gonna hold this off because when we're talking about horizon, we're really talking about, pag-isipin nyo, ngayon, kung ngayon ako magsa-start, when do you actually need the money? That's really, really the question. It doesn't always have to be about your age. It really has something to do about when the need is so that you can tie the investment option towards that need. Right? So hopefully that answers that question. Now, the last one is also on risk profile, right? So on risk profile, this is typically where you get a questionnaire, especially kung bumili na kayo ng insurance or if you bought a mutual fund from somewhere. You will get a questionnaire asking you how much loss can you tolerate? 5% lang ba? Magpapanik ka na? Or sa 15% ka ba magpapanik? Or masyado bang malakas yung loob mo at sa 50% ka pa magpapanik, meaning okay lang sa'yo kahit mag 50% loss at the exchange of potential higher returns, right? You get these questionnaires quite often. And that really tries to get to knowing about ano ba yung risk profile mo, right? So I'm gonna share maybe an anecdote of a friend who started investing and really didn't understand what they were investing in. So, kumuha sila ng fund. They never really understood para ba saan to. Pero parang narinig ko kasi okay mag-invest or kailangan mag-invest. So, sige, mag-invest tayo. Right? Which is, I think, more often than what we think nangyayari. In those cases, the problem is if you don't understand what you're doing, sometimes hindi mo pala alam na yung risk profile ng kinuha mong product is too high for you. So in this case, that friend took an 100% equity mutual fund. For those who understand, you're gonna understand what I'm saying. For those who are not yet aware of an equity fund basically is parang isipin mo, isa siyang buong fund na minamanage ng bank or an investment firm. At nilalagay yun lahat sa stocks, right? They manage whatever is the share of the stocks na pinaglalagyan nila. Obviously, because these are stocks, they are very dependent kung ano mangyayari sa kumpanyang yon na pinili nila to be part of the fund. Now, when the COVID pandemic happened, which is about March 2020, when all of a sudden nag-lockdown technically yung buong mundo, and for those who follow the stock market, you've actually been through maybe a 50% wipe out of the assets, right? So from PSEI at about 7,000 to 8,000 range, naging 3 to 4,000 range lang siya bigla within the same month. And so if you don't understand the profile that you are in, meaning ano ba talaga yung risk tolerance mo as a person, and if you don't match that with the investment that you have or that you are being offered with, it's gonna be a very, very difficult conversation at the time when dumating na yung mga risks na yun and nag-actualize yung risk na yun. It's very easy if yung baliktad yung nangyari. Let's say, sinabi nila, mag-stocks tayo kasi pwede tong 10 to 20% return on average, which is also true. But sometimes we are not told upfront that at the expense of trying to get that 10 to 20% return, meron palang downside na pwede palang 10 to 30% loss din. So it's very, very important for you to understand the risk profile. Now, how do you actually do this if you have no idea what you're doing right now? The good part is there are very, very good tools in the internet. I will link that in the description box when this live stream gets uploaded to the channel so that you can check it out and try to get a questionnaire so that you can answer maybe 10 to 15 questions, and then ideally the tool will give you an idea kung ano yung risk profile nyo so that at least you know yourself. The only caveat in risk profile is just think about it. Risk is a very, very fluid thing. So pwede ngayon natatakot ka, eventually hindi ka na kasing takot. Right? So these are the three big components that you have to figure out before you start investing. Right now, I'm gonna take a few questions. I think meron ng iba na nagtanong. So I'm gonna try to backtrack a bit. So I'm getting questions from Ria, right? Ria Cruz. So thanks for asking the question. For example, the question here is actually how much was your emergency fund when you started investing? This is a very, very good question. And I hope na panood mo yung 8 Pro Steps Towards Financial Independence. Now, I should have said this probably earlier in the stream, but while we're talking about investing 101 tonight, we're not actually advocating that you start with investing in your financial journey, right? We're advocating for you learning your savings behaviors and setting up an emergency fund first. So this is a very, very good question that actually reminded me to highlight that. So thanks for asking. The answer is I had 9 months of my monthly income as emergency fund set up. So before I even went to investing, I got 9 months of my monthly income just in case something happens, and that 9 months is sitting somewhere inside a high yielding savings account with a higher interest than normal. So the digital banks right now will actually give you 4%, or some of it is within our company's cooperative, which actually gave historically good returns of about 3.5 to 5%. So that can be an option for you too, right? Now, I also am getting a question on what's the best route to take for those who invested late for retirement, right? So if you think about it, now that we're talking about horizon, meaning, think niya, so if I dissect this question, think about it in the context of PHP. So now, purpose is very clear. It's for retirement. So the next question is, when does retirement happen for you? Because for some people, they target retirement to be at age 45, right? So kung 35 ka na ngayon, medyo kailangan doble kayo, right? Because that's only 10 years from now. Some people want to stay the traditional route. I mean, they love their jobs, they find fulfillment in what they're doing. They want to retire at the maximum, let's say 65 years old, right? So number one is just be very, very clear of what the time horizon is so that you really understand ano ba talaga yung time left for the investment to actually yield results. Now, let's take this as I will assume that you are in your early 30s and you still have maybe 20 to 30 years left. So I would actually say na you're not super late, right? So that may not be a drastic change. But if you are maybe mid 40s to late 40s, early 50s, and you're planning to retire in 10 to 15 years, then the best route is actually then you have to ask your question, sorry, you have to ask a question of what is your objective or what is the objective amount by the time you retire. So, alam kong medyo kailangan mo siyang pag-isipan and the answer is not very straightforward. Some people want to risk a bit more so that they actually try to maximize the gains dun sa time left nila. Some people, maybe I would say on average, if you are 55 years old, nag-retire ka by age 60, what you will actually put your money into are the safer bets so that medyo ma-protect mo yung money that you already have and you don't risk it all. Because, for example, who knows that in the next 5 years, wala talagang bagong COVID or whatever natural or even man-made calamity will happen. So it really depends on these three behaviors. But in the next few slides, we're gonna talk about a few options and probably that may answer it for you. If not, just ask again. Okay, I'm gonna take maybe two more so that we can move towards the next section. But keep those questions coming. I'll try to the ones that I am not answering directly, I am holding off for the future slides so that it's a bit tight. Okay, I have a question from Kuya Edwin. So this one is maybe early 30s, right? What are the recommended platforms for to have a house, right? To have your own house and asking for a friend. Okay, noted on the asking for a friend, right? So in your if you're in your early 30s, that's good. Now my question is, when do you want to have the house, right? Those are the guide questions. Kasi kung kailangan mo na to by 2 years from now, that's gonna be very different versus maybe 38, 39, or 40 kapag gusto magkabahay, right? So just be very clear on what the time horizon is. And then, couple that with the risk that you're willing to take. So, I have a friend who's also in the live stream, hindi ko na lang papangalanan. This friend bought a condominium unit and wants to pay off for the condo actually in the next, I think, 3 or 4 years, right? This friend is very, very aggressive in terms of investment profile. So, what she actually does is she invested this into individual stocks, na growth stocks, thinking na baka makamaximize ako ng return. So, for example, I think for those who follow Philippine news, you're actually gonna see that, let's say, the Dito stock, right? So, the Dito, which is the third telco that's gonna go live in the next few months, maybe, the stock price of that has very, very much increased in the past few months. So, while that's good, right? Maganda yung story na yon. But eventually, if hindi nangyari yon, take that only about 2 to 3 years back into this supposed third telco called Now. Si Now, before Now Telecom, is no longer Now kasi parang nawala na siya sa ere. That one was the big bet of the third telco. So a lot of people actually invested in it. Nag-grow yung stock ngayon, but now wala na siya, right? So, it's not even being talked about. The operations have stopped. So, you can actually potentially lose money in terms of that strategy. Now, I'm not gonna say which ones you take. It all depends on the profile of the risk that you're willing to take as long as you're very clear kung ano yung trade-off na parang kinukuha mo. In this case, in this example, so far so good because this stock has probably grown more than 100% in the past few months. So good for that friend, but I'm not saying do the same thing because it will really depend on your individual preference. So that hopefully that helps. Let's probably take there are a few questions on freshmen or fresh graduates. I'm gonna talk about that maybe in a later slide, so I'll remember. And then let's just take one last question on MP2, right? So this question on from Ria again on is it safe to leave your money in MP2 until retirement? This actually talks about your PHP again, right? So again, if I try to deduce the question, you're asking for retirement. You're asking safe ba yung yung MP2 and you're referring to the Pag-ibig MP2 from a risk profile standpoint, then the answer really is yes because it's government backed. But then you also have to take into account na kung malayo pa yun, are you actually taking very low risk with the time that you have? So let's for example say 30 years old ka. If you have 30 years more, you have to probably assess na is it the right way to think na I will just leave money in MP2 and just let it stay there for the rest of eternity hanggang ma-retire ako and probably earn 6 to 7%? Or can I actually take more risk and try to earn a bit more by putting it in another investment, right? So that's the question I'm going to throw back to you. But more of a mental exercise that I hope this PHP is helping you frame in your mind para malagyan mo yung investment objective mo ng structure when you think about it. Okay, great. So, thanks for those questions. I hope I answered most of them. If I missed, please just copy paste so that I can see them again. But let's move on. So now we're gonna talk about more specifically risks of investment, right? And typically when you hear people talk about risk, you're gonna hear them talk about it from like a speedometer type of range. So sa speedometer, you have like the green ones are the safe ones. So you would have that as a conservative or a low risk investment. You have the other side of the speedometer, which is very, very red, so aggressive, high risk. And typically, risk is almost always correlated to the amount of returns that you can potentially get, right? So you probably heard this in your economics class way back when, or if you are a fresh grad, then that may just be like 2 months ago. Right? So if you think about risk, really, the lower the risk, typically the return that you will get is lower because you're taking in less stress and less uncertainty in that investment. And yung kabaliktaran nun is kung mas hindi natin alam kung anong mangyayari, then you have potentially higher returns, right? Similar to the example that I said for the Dito stock, for example, right? And Aldrin, I saw the question. This is kilala mo. So that friend is that friend, right? So let's think about risk though from the context of investments. And a lot of you were thinking, okay, saan ba ako maglalagay? What is a safe investment? Saan ko ba pwedeng ilagay yung money ko if I want to save for a college fund or a retirement fund? What are the different kinds of investment platforms for students who want to start investing? For example, Mary is asking, right? And what is the price range? Or I'm assuming you're asking what is like the initial investment that you will need to prepare to actually be able to start, right? So let's talk about now the many different kinds of investments in relation to the risks that we are gonna take in those investments. Okay, now on to the good part, right? And I hope this one stirs up a few more questions from you. Now, before we get into the long list of different kinds of investments, let's think now, try to summarize everything that we've talked about in the past maybe 40 minutes or so, and think about what are the investment factors, right? So ulit, kailan mo kailangan? Ano ba yung kahaba yung time that you still have para mapagana mo yung money in wherever you put it, right? That's number one. Number two is how much money are you able to generate? Because really, when we talk about investments, the reality is you cannot invest something you don't have. And that's why I'm a very, very strong advocate of really developing good savings and budgeting habits before you actually do invest. Kasi sometimes you want to do the sexy parts of, oh, sige, mag-invest tayo on Ethereum, Bitcoin, Dogecoin, right? All of these new cryptocurrencies because they're hip. But if we don't have budgeting and savings as a good practice, then we may be setting ourselves up into a very, very wobbly foundation. So just take note of that when you plan out your investments, right? The last one is really the third factor is the returns that you can get from this investment. So that also talks about the MP2 question or asking earlier if a pre-selling house is actually a good idea and whatnot, right? So we're gonna talk about that, but keep these three in mind so that you know how to think about these different types. Some of these may be very obvious, so I'm gonna breeze through them. Some of these may be quite new, so if you have questions, just feel free to ask them in the live chat. So let's go with the low risk, stable return ones first. And these are probably the ones that you will most likely see everywhere, right? So let's start with a typical savings account. So savings, you deposit to a bank. Time deposit is basically a deposit with a time constraint. So hindi mo withdraw for a certain number of days. Typically, it's about, I think the shortest is 30 days. But it can go to as high as a year or maybe a couple of years. The longer you keep the money in the bank, somewhat higher yung returns na nakukuha nyo. Right? Money market funds, you may have heard about this. The most accessible money market fund is nowhere but in your GCash app, right? So kung may GCash kayo, like I think most people have right now, what you will have in the GCash app is a G-Invest option, right? The G-Invest option has a money market fund in it. So, pwede kang maglagay dyan. The money market fund actually places money on the next two kinds of investment. So, they put money on treasury bills if the government issues bills. Technically, nangungutang yung government sa'yo. Or if there are time deposits, sometimes the money market fund also invests in them, or they also invest in government and corporate bonds. Right? I talk about most of these investment types in the latest video we uploaded last Wednesday, which is the basic types of investment. So if you want to learn a bit more, you can watch that video after the stream, right? So please do subscribe to the channel so that you're updated with other videos that we may put up related to this. But essentially, if you think about this bottom tier of the investment pyramid, we're talking about low risk, stable return items. Meaning, when you deposit money into the bank, pag sinabihan ka niya na okay, 0.25% or pag nagsabi siya time deposit, 1 year, let's say 0.5% if you deposit 100,000, right? You can sleep at night quite soundly as long as the bank is very reputable and has been doing this for a considerable amount of time, and they're also insured by the PDIC in case the bank closes. So in this case, the returns are not very, very good. Probably the biggest you will get here is in the range of about 3 to 4%. Now, the question maybe in your minds is, so then if you're looking for the first kind of investment, is this really where you start? The answer is it can be, because it's good. It's good starting point for you to understand how investing and how banking works. But I would caution that you would only do this for two reasons in the most common sense. Number one is you're very new and you're just learning your way around. Gusto mo lang malagay in a very, very safe asset, or you're the type na medyo affected ka if there's volatility in your money. That can also be a reason. The second one is typically if you ask banker friends who work in a financial institution, the ones who actually deposit money in time deposits are the medyo pensioners, retirees profile. Because again, if you think about the question earlier on retirement na, if you're already retired, what you actually want to do is to preserve the assets that you were able to accumulate when you were still working or when you were still very actively bringing in income. So, ang nangyayari, once they have the money, they just want that money to stay there, kahit medyo maliit yung returns, pero at least safe yung money nila, makakatulog sila ng mahimbing. Right? So, this is the kind of investments that you can choose if you are in those. But for example, another friend, so not the same friend of the Dito stock, I talked to over the Christmas break, right? And he showed me his investment portfolio, and it had a money market fund in it. Now, I didn't know why there was a money market fund. This friend is like 30, 31 years old. So very not also very conservative, I think moderate in terms of risk profile. But I didn't really understand why there is a money market fund there. So I asked the question, oh, bakit ka may money market fund? And the reason was I just really didn't know what I was investing in. So I think that's a good example of just trying to understand saan ba nilalagay ng mga funds na yun, kasi minsan tinatawag sila ng ibang bagay pero in reality the money market funds really just invest those money in time deposits or treasury bills or bonds. So just make sure to double click your prospectus or the fact sheet so that you know exactly where the fund is investing that money. Right? So Ila has a question. For example, interest rate for time deposits for a couple years is significantly higher than a deposit, and is it higher with digital banks as well? So in the old world, meaning pre-digital bank, the answer is yes. Typically, time deposits will have a higher interest rate, albeit very, very small difference. So it's not monumentally big, but it is higher because you're tying your money with them. But now, with digital banks, because the digital banks don't have operating costs as much as traditional banks, they're actually passing very, very high interest rates. So if you were to do a comparison between digital banks today versus a time deposit, the time deposit is nothing. So my advice is just go with the digital banks for now. They're more liquid, they offer higher returns. Okay, great. I'm gonna cover a few other questions in the next slide. Okay, let's go a bit higher in terms of risk. Right? So in terms of moderate risk, now we're talking about some level of volatility, pero hindi pa rin yung parang hardcore matatakot ka. Right? So we're talking about stocks, and I break them down into two chunks, which is really I'm talking about the blue chips or the growth stocks. What do I mean by this? In terms of the Philippines, you would probably hear the most common blue chips to be Ayala Corp, SM, BDO, SM Prime Holdings, those kinds of companies, right? Ayala Land. Um, and those kinds of companies are called blue chips because they're very established, and they tend to be very, very reliable companies that have a long-standing tradition of giving out good returns, meaning nagdi-dividends pa yung iba, or really the company is really just performing really well in general. So you can actually rely on these companies like maybe San Miguel, right, who has been there for like over a century already in the Philippines, right? So blue chips are think about blue chips as your stable, reliable stocks in the stock market. Right? Now, if you put money there, I'm saying, yes, there's a potential that these companies will actually not perform well, but over a long period of time, the returns can actually be good because, for example, just take Ayala Corp as a good basis, right? If you have Ayala Corp as the blue chip stock, Ayala Corp has been expanding into different kinds of areas. Dati, nasa real estate, maybe banking, maybe automotives, yung core businesses ng Ayala Corp, but now they're even now bringing in new capabilities for e-commerce and digital commerce, last mile delivery, mga partnerships with Zalora, etc., etc., and sometimes even renewable energies, which is a totally different space, right? So if you think about it, Ayala Corp has been very, very stable, and I think for Ayala Corp to actually lose or like end up with nothing, the Philippine economy has to probably burst or something before the Ayalas lose everything that they have. So those can be moderate risk, especially if you watch it from a maybe more frequent time zone, but over the number of years, assuming that you have that horizon, then this can be a good option for you. Now, also, there are funds. So, dito naman, when you say funds, typically naririnig nyo yung mutual fund, UITF, or the VULs, right? In insurance companies where the insurance policy comes with an investment along with that policy. So the funds typically are there are different kinds of funds, but in general, they can be index funds that follow your PSE index. So kung ano yung index of the top 30 companies in the PSE or the Philippine Stock Exchange, sinusundan lang na yun kung ano yung composition na yun. Or meron ding mga funds that we call managed funds in the Philippines, meaning ito, pumipili sila ng specific kinds of stocks. So, some of them would have a higher concentration on, say, I'm making this up, on, say, telcos, and maybe sometimes nagpapasok sila ng mining companies because they feel that there is growth towards a later part in the investment horizon. So, parang nag-speculate sila. So, funds are a good way to manage your risk because ang kagandahan, different from buying into stocks, when you buy into funds, you're buying a portion of the total pot na paiba-iba na yung companies na binibili mo. So when you buy a stock, technically you're buying one company, right? Like say Ayala Corp. But then you buy a fund, which is maybe a PSE index fund, you're technically buying the basket of stocks already. So you can already probably do some diversification in that portfolio already when you buy the fund. Right? The other option for moderate risk is real estate. So this can be in the form of land, or it can also be in the form of condominium units or house and lots. And so I'm gonna bring up a question here earlier of asking, is a pre-selling condo a good investment? And that's just because it's also a trend in the Philippines, right? My take is, again, balik tayo dun sa PHP and try to understand, when you say good investment, what is that investment for? Because long term, I think pre-selling condominiums are good because generally they're priced well, meaning typically about 10 to 15% lower than the ready for occupancy price. So that's a good deal, right? Especially if you're buying several millions in terms of property. However, if you need this money maybe in the next 3 years, for maybe your kids' high school or college tuition, then probably a condo is not a good investment. So I know that it's very relative to what the investment of goal or objective is. But in general, right, if you were to compare this versus other kinds of investments, you can look into it, and typically, as long as you buy from a reputable company, like say the big ones, Ayala, Mega World, DMCI, you should be okay because they tend to have very good delivery rates to their clients in the end. So I think you're okay. I would just caution on pre-selling condominiums or townhouses or house and lots with smaller developers because that may be a risk, especially if hindi pa sila as established, because they can actually run with your money or or deliver an inferior product to you in the end. So just make sure you do your due diligence before you actually buy into a pre-selling unit kasi hindi mo pa nakikita yung actual asset. Okay? Now, the last one, we're gonna go into the highest tier in terms of risk. Now, when we talk about risk, we talk about volatility and uncertainty. So, in high risk investments, you can have very volatile returns, meaning these can be things that will change in a heartbeat. So, these can be commodities like gold, oil. You can actually buy penny stocks or speculative stocks. These are things na walang track record, bigla na lang umaakyat because of a how do you call this? Because of a theory na this company will be the next wave successful company, etc., etc. So those are very, very uncertain. Collectibles also form part um, of this group because in collectibles, you're really hedging that for example, an art piece will have a higher value years from now. Maybe sometimes, typically, the value jumps when the artist, like say painters, when they die, because then the supply really then ran out, right? Wala nang more pieces of art that very good and renowned artist na lalabas. So then the art can maybe be a good investment, but you don't really know what will happen because the prices can fluctuate very, very easily. You also have peer-to-peer lending. This is more your seed in the Philippines. So if you've heard about that, this is basically a platform where you're lending money to a corporation who wants to borrow from you instead of a bank. So typically, they would have higher returns. They would range in the 10 to 16% per year, which is quite high for lending. But also, syempre, you run a higher risk because you're technically loaning to a company directly just via a platform. So just take note of that. The last one, and probably the most controversial one in the past few weeks, are cryptocurrencies. So you probably seen in social media or in the news, if you follow these sort of things, that Bitcoin, Ethereum, and all of the other speculative cryptocurrencies medyo nagtaasan in value. And yes, dito din siya papasok yung mga collectibles ng mga bags and and whatnot, right? Some people, dito din pumapasok yung mga watch collection of some people, where there's speculation that the value will actually increase over time, right? So part of the collectibles piece. You don't really know if they will increase, but depends on who you ask. Right now, we talked about the general sense of what are the options that you have in terms of different kinds of investments and the returns that you will get from them. Now, ang question that I typically, as I'm scrolling through the feed, right? Typically, the question that you get is, what is the best investment? And that's a very, very hard question to answer if we don't have all of the things factored in. So I would really urge you to think about the PHP as a construct as you think about investments, right? Para saan? Kailan ko kailangan? And gaano ba ako katapang for the risk that I am about to take? Because those three will really form part of the choices that you're gonna make in terms of these different types of options. Now, I have a question here of what is my first investment. So my first investment is actually a VUL. I started this like when I joined the workforce. The next one is a mutual fund because my logic before was natakot ako sa stock market because I didn't know what to do. Right? And probably that's a good first step because at least in mutual funds, so this is this piece here on the moderate risk. When you put in money into mutual funds, what do you get? You get a basket of different kinds of stocks, right? So medyo naka scatter na yung risk when you buy the fund versus if tumaya ka into one company and that company actually does not perform really well, then you have a higher risk, right? So those are things that you can probably take into account when you choose your first investment options, especially as you're learning through the investment world. So just try to think first, ano ba talaga yung purpose, time, and risk that you can take, and we can talk about that in the next few slides. So I'm right at the last parts of the presentation, so we can answer more questions that you will have. So the question that you probably have after all of that is, okay, now what? Right? So, okay, gets na namin that there is risk. Gets na namin that you have to understand what is the purpose and the time that you have. But what then should you really think of? So, then the first step is really to assess your PHP. Right? We talked about this. Yes, pasok ang self-growth and counted because really in most cases, what I will really suggest for you if you're really starting out, especially for the younger ones who have joined the chat, and I see your questions, and I know na young kayo because you're calling me Manong. um, so what I'm suggesting to you is you actually start small, right? You can choose one of those very, very simple to open accounts like the Pag-ibig MP2, or you can even open a mutual fund as long as you're 18 years old with your bank. BPI, BDO, the big ones will have their own mutual funds. I wouldn't really burden and overburden myself so that yung first ko na investment is really the perfect best one, because there really is no perfect best one among all of those choices. But what I would urge you is to start small and then learn as you go, because every time, even if there is conventional wisdom in all of these investments, nag-iiba-iba din yung landscape, right? So sometimes we say, like in the case, for example, there was a question on time deposits. What probably my parents will tell you is that time deposits offer higher rates of return. And this is actually true because during their time, way back when, time deposits actually give you about 5 to 8% per year. So which is also very decent returns. But now, if you just lived with that notion na okay pala ang time deposit, so mag-time deposit ako, then hindi ka na nag-check ng rates, and now you will really, really see that if you invest in time deposits right now, the time deposits rates are maybe 0.2, 0.15% right now, because there are there are a lot of changes in terms of what the economic situation is at the time when you enter the market. So just make sure that you know those things and start small, and don't force yourselves or pressure yourselves na the first investment is also always the right one, right? As you go through, you will learn a bit more. The other thing that I will try to highlight, and hopefully this is good reminder even for myself, is some of us also invest just because we have the fear of missing out. So may FOMO lang. Na, oh no, lahat sila nag-uusap na about Bitcoin, right? And wala pa ako nabibiling Bitcoin. So am I missing the next wave and all of this, right? Or yung friend ko nakabili ng dito stock when it was just 2 pesos. Ngayon, 13 pesos na siya. I'm too late. So, hindi na lang ako i-invest at all. Right? So, I almost often hear that from, even from friends. Right? So, again, when you start your investment journey, number one, don't do it because everyone else says so. I would say because everyone else says so, learn about it and try to understand ano ba talaga yun so that you can make your own financial judgment if you're really willing to risk on say something like Bitcoin, right? So if you are um, if you are like Kat, who is all in and going for Bitcoin and Ethereum, and I know this because we've been talking about this for the past few days. Um, by all means, learn about it, try something small, and try to understand what these are. But just be very aware that when you get into high risk investments, they can really be a roller coaster ride. So just prepare yourself mentally and more so emotionally for that roller coaster ride. Don't do it for the sake of FOMO, because if you are just in the FOMO land, then you are actually missing out on the entire point of investing and trying to come up with a plan to actually reach your financial security and financial independence goals. Right? Okay. Now, let's go on to a few more tangible examples. Right? So, let's take into account, for example, one case where you have a scenario. Um, a mom or a dad trying to build a college fund for their kid who is going into college in 5 years, for example. Right? They are very conservative. Na-try na nilang mag-invest in stocks or in crypto at ninervyo sila every time may fluctuation in the market. Right? So, sabi nila, PPA, hindi ko kaya to kasi baka mag-panic attack ako pag nag-roller coaster yung stocks or the cryptocurrency, right? So they're very conservative. They tested it out. Not for them, they lose sleep over the tumble and the jumps of the market. So what you can actually do is, now that you have this scenario, it's very simplified, guys. So we cannot go through all of the underlying assumptions. But assuming that this is an average couple, then you can probably do a simple pag-ibig MP2 like one of our friends over a chat mentioned earlier. You can do that. It's a decent return. It's 6 to 7% per year. It's a 5-year minimum. So, pasok doon sa time horizon na gusto nila. And it's government backed. The principal is backed by the government. So, at least medyo insured yung money mo. So, even if pag-ibig doesn't do really well, bababa lang yung dividends that you get, but the amount that you put in is actually protected. So, at least, medyo may peace of mind ka na hindi siya kagaya ng, say, a Bitcoin that can probably wipe out everything you put in kung medyo may topak yung day trading na yun. Right? The other one is you can also do something a bit more moderate. Right? So, you can do a mutual fund. So, you can probably do a fund that has a balance of stocks and bonds. There are funds like those na binabalanse niya yung risk profile mo para hindi siya 100% stock. So when the stock market falls, baka ma-offset ng mga bonds in that same fund yung return mo, and you can actually live with that kind of profile. It may or may not yield to higher returns. It really depends on the market performance. So this is a good example that it may be not something na retirement na say decades away, but it can actually be like a few years from now. So you have to be a bit more sensitive of your risk profile. Kasi if you cannot live through that uncertainty, then I would say try to find the best investment that you can find in the risk profile that you're willing to take. Okay. Um, the other one is maybe one more example, right? Before I take more specific questions. I see there's a few more in chat, so we can open that for more questions in a while. Right? This scenario, for example, I'm trying to build a retirement fund 30 years from now. I'm aggressive, so meaning kaya ko i-take yung roller coaster ng stock market or whatever investment that may be. Anyway, matagal pa naman yun. I have time to correct. This is probably me as an example. So when we think about retirement, yung goal namin is, for example, when we retire, we should be able to visit different countries and try to live for a few weeks or months at a time in those countries, for example. And so now gusto ko may fund ako for that goal 30 years from now. Then I can actually do a blend of the following, right? You can do equity index fund, which really is tied to the stock market. I can do a mutual fund na biased for growth. I can do growth stocks both in the Philippines or elsewhere, US, China, Hong Kong, or other countries. I can do that as well because then I'm willing to take in a bit more risk. Or I even put some money into crypto if I really believe that the cryptocurrency will be the next wave of currency, maybe 10 years from now, right? If that happens, then I probably will get higher returns if I place money in crypto today. So again, just be very clear of your purpose and your horizon para alam niyo kung ano yung options that you will take. Now, if you tell me that even if it's 30 years from now, hindi ko talaga kaya yung ganong volatility in the stock market, then you can downgrade the aggressiveness into the middle or the moderate fund so that at least hindi ka naman nag-miss out in the potential returns. Now, what you can do is, I think, the best way, and Kat in one of the comments earlier said, I think the best thing against the risk profile, especially for the ones na medyo low risk as an inherent feeling or bias, when you choose this, just make sure that you also did the due diligence to try to understand the asset. Right? Kasi minsan, natatakot lang tayo because we fear the unknown. Hindi natin alam kung ano ba naman talaga to. So, when we don't know, typically we're a bit more fearful. So then, parang nangyayari, we tend to choose the lower risk items. Pero we're then giving up returns in the process. So, just make sure that you do your due diligence and give some of these more volatile ones a chance, especially if you can take that in your horizon. Okay? So, maybe as a few quick next steps before we jump into more Q&A, is to do just these three very, very easy things. So, one is to set an amount every month, try to understand your budget and set that aside and put that in regularly. Again, personal finance is maybe 80-90% about behavior and discipline more than the technical side of finance, right? So, the people who actually succeeded in personal finance are not always the ones who know how to do technical analysis on stocks and whatnot, but they are the people who were actually very, very diligent when they were doing their financial planning and the execution of that plan. So just make sure that you are doing that regularly. I think that's your best ally. The other one is to open an account and try to find platforms that enable. Some of these accounts are online, so MP2 is online. My Trade in the Philippines, if you want to invest in Philippine stocks, can be opened online. Some of the newer peer-to-peer lending things can be done online. Don't worry, I will try to link as much of these in the description when I upload the video so that you can try to watch those and try to understand what they can offer. Also, some of these are platforms like eToro, for example. You can open online within, say, 10 minutes, get it verified within 1 or 2 days. Right? And you can start now learning and start investing. So a lot of it can be very easy. And the third one is really just to monitor your investments and try to learn from the mistakes, right? So one of the mistakes here, I'm saying don't panic sell, right? So when the market is actually performing bad, don't panic sell your stocks, right? Maybe hold on to them and trust that they will recover in time, and you will actually get your investment or maybe even earn back on that. Right, so these are maybe three few next steps that you can take after the stream. Obviously, it's always good to try to understand what else, what are my options, and what are the different things that I can try also. Okay, great. So let's now move into the Q&A session. I actually was able to get a few questions via the Instagram and Facebook stories. So I'm gonna put them up here. I don't know if Shams is in the call. So Shams actually asked a very, very practical questions. Like, what can young professionals invest in, right? And we sort of talked about this in the previous slides. It really all depends on what the purpose is, but the answer is there's really a lot. And if you think about what are your options, what I really would like you to do, especially if you have the spare cash to try the minimum deposits and amount of investments that they are asking for, is to just try them out. Right? So for example, this new seed-in platform where they do peer-to-peer lending to companies, I placed a minimal amount of money and invested maybe 3,000, 4,000 pesos per loan, and then try to understand what's really happening in this space because they offer relatively good returns. Like it's a 14 to 16% per year, which you cannot get in MP2 or more so in a bank. So those are options that you can take. It all depends. There is no one best investment, but at least you have a lot of options. So my suggestion would be to try and then decide on which ones you like from a structure and from a strategy and what you're investing in standpoint. Right? The other one that I got is from Marie. So I'm not sure if Marie is the is in the stream today, but she's also asking, is it better to invest in life insurance or putting up a business or investing in stocks and bonds, right? Again, the question really here is what are you investing in? I would really just try to separate life insurance per se because life insurance is really the how do you call this? Life insurance is really just protecting the assets that you currently have. And if you're talking about VULs, where there's an investment link portion, that can be similar to a mutual fund or stocks and bonds, right? So again, as you decide, just really understand what you're trying to put money in for. Now, if you're investing in the future and trying to foresee already that okay, when I'm getting medical expenses, will there be something that will help me pay for these bills, then by all means take a life insurance with health riders. Right? There's nothing wrong with that. But if you are a bit more aggressive and you're actually pushing for something that you have learned and you want to build as a business, then maybe a business is the better option for you. I know this is a bit of a non-committal answer because really, really, there's no one investment that will beat all of them, right? There's always gonna be an investment for a specific purpose, time, and reason. So the answer can really vary by person to person, and that's why I urge you to learn a bit more on the the different kinds of options that you have, and then try to think about okay, kung alam ko na yung PHP ko, right? My purpose, horizon, and profile. Pag nilatag ko na siya, what are the things that I can actually put money on so that I can put in a little at a time, especially if you're just starting out in your career, so that you're building towards it. And I can guarantee you that maybe after 6 or 12 months, after doing this, you're actually gonna learn a lot more from the experience. So just try to do that. Okay. So these are like the two relevant questions for the stream. I found a few other questions that were not so relevant, so we'll cover that in a different venue, maybe a video or maybe in a future stream. So now we're gonna just go into Q&A. So I see there's a lot more questions here, so I'm gonna try to backtrack a bit. But that basically ends the presentation. So feel free to ask questions related to the topic that we specifically had. You can go back to the slide if you want, or we can also talk about different things if you have other questions. So, um, what I can do is I can try to go back and just try to read across the thread. So maybe give me 2 seconds to drink water so that I still have a voice to talk to all of you. Okay, I'm getting shout out requests. So this is like a true YouTube live stream. So shout out to the Biola and Barrera family in Las Piñas and UK. So thanks for tuning in and for bringing friends with you from Shell HR and people from PNG in general. Shout out to all of you. I know you brought friends as well. So if you want shout outs, just put them in chat so that I will be able to cover all of those. Let's go through a bit of the other questions that you had. I'm just trying to go a few questions back so that we can go through a bit. Okay. So maybe one question, right, is on a question from Ila on cryptocurrency called Pi. Um, and you can actually gain if you have successful referrals, etc., etc. Right? A lot of these platforms will actually give you referral links. If they are reputable platforms, they will really give you referral links. eToro has a referral link that will give you 50 US dollars or roughly 2,500 pesos if you get others to join the platform. And I personally have received that referral credit, so it's legit. You can actually do those. For Pi, I'm not very clear on what the platform is, so maybe just do a double check. But on crypto, a lot of new cryptocurrencies have been popping up recently. The crypto in and of itself, like just as a thing, without any other consideration from a platform standpoint, the cryptos are legit because they can only be listed after they go through some level of registration. However, if there's really gain potential on the crypto is a very different thing. And to be honest, no one really knows, especially if it's a new cryptocurrency. So I would put that at the top of the list of high risk, high volatility. If you want to try to put money in it, I would say put money that you're willing and you're able to risk all in, even if you lose that money. I would just say invest up to that amount because you never know what will happen to these cryptocurrencies. The most recent one was news from the Ripple cryptocurrency. It has been in the market for several years, and now they're facing an issue because there's regulation that they probably did not fully accomplish at the time that they were being listed. So they're actually facing that problem right now in the US. So there's a lot of volatility and uncertainty if they can actually continue trading and what happens to everyone who has invested money in Ripple. So just take note of that. Another question, actually, I got this about twice. So one time is um, if you are based abroad, is it a good option to invest in the Philippines? And I also got another one similarly constructed question from Boyang on is it a good idea to invest in the Philippines or permanently based in a different country? Um, I would say two parts to the answer, but again, don't take this as financial advice. Do your own research before you actually dive in. I would always say number one, when you're doing cross country, cross border investments, you're always at the expense of fees. So just understand that when you put in money into a foreign exchange traded fund, you're gonna pay for a foreign exchange fee, which can easily be 2 or 3%, or sometimes even higher depending on the payment method that you're selecting. So with that, sometimes it's not the best base investment strategy. I would say try to invest where you're in for the long term para hindi na kayo magbayad ng fees. That's number one. Number two, though, it can also be a good idea if your base investment is actually very strong already. So, for example, in the case of you're permanently based in the United States, just because I know, if you're based in the US, I would suggest that you actually take a look at the different investment options in the US because there's gonna be a lot more options that you can take and try to understand what those are because if long term you're gonna stay in that country, the chances are your expenses, the cost of living, the realities of the economy will be similar to what you have in that country and not the Philippines because the Philippines will always think about the Philippine realities as of that time, if that makes sense. Now, I'm not saying you cannot diversify. So, for example, I have investments in the Philippines because that's just roughly long term the country I expect to live in. But I also have some investments that are linked to US securities, for example, because I'm thinking there may be a bit more growth in the US on certain areas like electronic vehicles, for example. So for people who know me, I'm a big Tesla fan. So um, that's only gonna be relevant if I invest in the US stock market, and I can never do that in the Philippines. So maybe things like those you have to also take into account when you think about diversifying. But if you're starting out, my advice would be to start in the country where you are in and where you're gonna stay in for the long term. Okay, so I see a few more questions. I'm gonna take Kat's question on what is the best investment in your current portfolio. So far, from a rate of return standpoint, it's really the Tesla stock. I am now 2x of what I invested in a very short amount of time. From an overall return standpoint, the other ones would probably be the condo unit I bought in the Philippines, which I bought as a foreclosed unit. So I got that for a very, very cheap price. And now with the real estate boom in recent years, that price also well over double what the price I paid maybe 6 or 7 years ago for that condominium unit. So that those two maybe are the best performing assets in my current portfolio. Maybe it will be Bitcoin in a week. I don't know. Um, I'm seeing. Okay, here. So from Aldrin, one question is also what platform is the best to start investing in stocks? I would say, especially for the Philippine stocks, my best advice, and I learned this because sometimes when you are investing, it's not really about the technical thing. It's about how regularly and how diligently can you do the investing. So I tried to open, for example, our company actually has BPI as the payroll bank, and I tried to open a call financial account. And so because it's much easier right now, but maybe years back, transferring money from my BPI account to call financial is a bit of a task. So I always did not do it very very regularly, so I'm actually missing out on the growth. So I then just decided to move all of my Philippine stocks to BPI Trade because they're very very synced, and it's very very easy to move funds from one place to another. So I would say choose the one that you can really regularly monitor and try. The differences in the Philippines in terms of platforms is very very low. So from a fee standpoint, almost all of them are the same. I think the only one that you can factor in, and you can probably ask friends who are more active in different platforms. I'm probably not the best person to advise because I only have BPI Trade. But for those who have varying kinds of experiences in different platforms, ask them the reliability of the platform itself. I heard there are some issues in some platforms from time to time, so maybe take that into account, especially if you're gonna do frequent trading like the day traders do. Um, if anyone has other platforms other than BPI Trade has been fairly stable for me, so I cannot complain. But if there are those of you who are still in the stream and um, can share some comments on other platforms, feel free to do so. I'll be glad to shout out those reactions so that we can help Aldrin out. Okay, correct. So the other one. So thanks, Kat, for also catching that. The other disadvantage, and this is just going back to the investing abroad kind of um, nuance that you had to take into account is also taxes, because you're gonna pay for taxes sometimes twice, especially for example if you're based in the US, since the US economy taxes income from within and without. So meaning whether you earn the income in the US or not, you will get taxed. So just take that into account because that's going to be double taxation. If you invest in the Philippines, then the Philippines would only tax you for income earned inside the Philippines. It's gonna be very complicated, and that's why I suggest just stick to the country that you are in for the long term. It's gonna make life very simple. Okay, great question from Bea. So Bea is asking, what platform can you actually use to practice trading and investing? And I hope I'm getting the question right. So just Bea, just let me know if I'm getting this wrong. But what I think you're thinking is maybe not putting in real money yet. Can you practice with, say, a virtual fund that you can manage? In the Philippines, most of the big platforms have this sort of functionality where you have a virtual money. The Philippine Stock Exchange website actually has a functionality where you can play around. I'm not sure if this is updated, but I think they give you 100,000 pesos play virtual money, not real money, that you can invest in certain stocks that you choose. So you can actually learn about board lots, odd lots, what's the minimum size, how are the fees computed, and then you can actually track how the investment in your portfolio is performing without really risking real money in the process. So you can do that within the PSE website, or if you want to do global stocks, for example, eToro, because I use eToro for my US trades. eToro has a virtual portfolio that you can also play with. They give you, I think, $100,000 that you can play around with. Obviously, it's play money, but at least you can track certain investments and you can try to play around with it and just monitor the success or the failure of the investments you're putting in. So, Bay, I hope that answers. And for everyone else who wants to do that, you can try that out. Jem has a question on US based stocks. I only have eToro for now. I'm happy with it. The user interface is very, very easy to follow. It's um, very intuitive. You can follow it from the first step after you apply. I have not tried other platforms. I think for more serious day trading capabilities, there are better platforms that you can choose. But at least for now, if you're planning to just get your feet wet in the US market, eToro is a good starting point for most people. And then I think once you start to decide to be more in depth or try more from that standpoint, and probably take another step in understanding what the big traders or the more seasoned traders are doing. And that's probably a good thing. I see the platform question come up several times. I'm gonna note that down. Maybe we'll do a follow-up video to answer different platforms and see if there are really differences from those. But eToro is so far quite stable and quite reliable. Okay. Oh, we have a question from Chai. So Chai, I'm not sure if this is Chai or Franklin, but whichever of you. The question is conjugal. So the question is, if I invest annually to Phil Equity. So for those who are not clear, Phil Equity is a mutual fund. It's an investment company that has mutual funds. Um, do you think it's wise to continue doing so, or do I have to try other platforms? The answer is, again, what's the purpose and why, and what is the time horizon? The Phil Equity Fund, if you're referring to the Philippine Stock Exchange Equity Index Fund, is actually one of the better performing funds just from a tracking error standpoint. So the funds, and not to be technical about it, the funds are also measured as to how small the difference is from the fund versus the index that they are tracking. And Phil Equity has been very good in tracking the index, meaning you can rely on Phil Equity to give you the average return of the market reliably. Some funds have higher margin of tracking error, so that can be good or bad, so you don't want that. Now, if you're asking, is it good to continue doing so? The answer is very nuanced to your personal circumstance. But I would say, in a general sense, as long as you're investing in the long term, putting it into an equity index fund can be a good stable source of return. In the past, the return has been about 8 to 10% in the Philippines, which is actually quite decent. But if you're trying to find other ways to bring that return higher, or if you want to try other platforms, you can also do so. What I would suggest is you keep that amount that you've been putting into Phil Equity and keep that going because you've already had the rhythm. It will just be a good exercise to just keep doing it, and then set aside maybe a small amount that you can try on other platforms, or even use virtual play money to try other platforms first. What you would definitely learn after doing so is you would see, okay, this may be a better option. So for example, if you're more like me that wants to invest on electric cars or sustainable companies, which we don't have a lot in the Philippines, then maybe investing in the US stock exchange can be a better option for you. But I would suggest do that as a transitionary step, and don't do it na, okay, hindi na ako mag-deposit sa Phil Equity and then bahala na kung saan ko siya ilalagay, because that's probably a recipe for you letting go of the habits that you already built. So I hope that helps. Try to ease into changing the platforms, and hopefully you learn, and once you learn you can make a more informed decision. Okay, let me try to go a few questions back. And then probably we'll give ourselves maybe 5 to 10 more minutes to questions if you have more, so that we can still answer those. We're just slightly over the 90-minute mark, so I think that should be okay. I hope you guys are still alert and are still able to follow the discussion. If you have other questions, I'm just trying to see if I missed anything in the earlier parts. Okay. I think we captured most. I only miss the, like, maybe one or two. So I'll try to cover that and see if there are new ones. This one is from Saive. So one is curious about RGS investment. Trending on FB. I am probably old enough that I did not see this trend. So I do not have a personal point of view. But your question is that if it's a networking scam, which I can probably help you. I'm not sure about RGS investment specifically, but typically when you see some red flags, you will be able to tell if it's more or less a scam by checking maybe three things. Number one, are they really registered with the SEC or the BSP? Right? If they are not registered, then the chances are it's a scam. Right? So that's number one. Just check their license. If they are in fact registered, you can do this by checking the SEC website. If you cannot find them, and if you're really seriously considering them, I would suggest emailing SEC and trying to confirm if they really have the license that they are saying that they have. That's probably gonna get rid of 90% of the scams, because most of these companies that are scams don't even bother registering with the right authority anyway. The second thing that you can take as a red flag is if there is a promise of very, very high returns for very, very little risk. Meaning, pag sinabihan ka na doble pera mo in 2 weeks, wala kang gagawin, maglalagay ka lang ng pera mo, the chances are it's either a scam or it's a very, very speculative product. And then, what I'm saying is there can be products that can double in value in 2 weeks. Like, take the likes of a Bitcoin. But what I'm saying is, if they're not able to share with you the reason why it will double in 2 weeks or a very, very high return without you doing anything, the chances are is that that thing is a scam. So I would probably go far away from that item. And then the third one would be try to get consensus from people who have actually done it from before, and take this with a grain of salt, because some people would actually hype it up, because some of these networking scams are referral based, meaning you earn if you get more people in, right? So they may have bias, but try asking a friend that you can trust to give you some feedback on the investment. But in general, if it's too good to be true and they cannot explain to you why it's too good to be true, then it's most likely not true. Okay, I think we have a few new ones. So RGS investment, not very sure. I have not seen. I will do some research and try to get back. Um, but there is one more question in terms of, hold on. Ah, so for example, for fresh graduates, so Bea's asking, for fresh graduates, she's currently using GSave, which is the digital bank feature of GCash, and that's earning probably 3 to 4% per year. But are there better platforms in the future? The answer is yes. You can try to check that long list and try to figure out a few of those that you want to learn more, and then try them out for yourself, right? And then try to understand what the underlying assets are. Okay, I hope that I have gone through all of your questions. If I missed anyone, I am sorry. I will give you 2 more minutes to copy paste the question so that you can get through it. Um, but other than that, thanks for staying and spending time with me on the Saturday evening. I hope you learned a thing or two. If you are still very, very new to this space and if you still feel confused, that's okay. There are a lot of choices, but I hope you end up just understanding a few big topics that we talked about. One is the power of compounding, that as you build wealth over time, consistently and regularly, the compounding power of earnings will really help you. Right? It will earn interest upon interest. The other one is to understand your PHP so that you know exactly what you're putting money into, so that you know the purpose, horizon, and the risk profile that you're considering when you place your hard earned money there. The last thing that I want you to take away from this is there is really no one good or one size fit all investment strategy that you will be able to find, right? It's gonna be different for every single person, for any single case. So I highly suggest, and this is my last plug, and to try to just subscribe to the channel. We're gonna talk about other kinds of investment strategies, other kinds of maybe companies that are new and we don't know a lot of them. I'll try to help research and share my thoughts on it. I'm also trying to regularly update the blog. So that's the www.thepesopro.com. So if you have time, I write once every 1 or 2 weeks, depending if I can do that in a time frame, but I try to update it quite regularly. And then if you want to be more in-depth and deliberate in terms of your personal finance journey, I also offer finance coaching. So if you want to really dig deep into investments or a total overhaul of your personal finance um, uh, strategy towards the goals that you have for yourself, then you can send me an email at hello@thepesopro.com. That's the one at the bottom, so that I can answer your questions for different kinds of scenarios. Because as you've learned in the stream, investments are generic, meaning the options that we have are quite similar, but the one strategy that will work for you may not always work for another person because of the different circumstances that they have. So just make sure that you factor that into your strategy planning, or if you really need help, I'd be glad to extend help and we can talk about how we go about it. Just a few more comments. So Kat is asking for hotel points and airline miles hacks for the next session. We will see. There is a very, very interesting change in the Philippine mileage scene. So, not good news overall, but I'll try to cover maybe in a video, or maybe if we have a lot more, we can talk about it in a live stream. So, this is the first ever episode. Thanks for everyone who stayed all the way to the end. I hope this was of value to you. And I hope you learned a thing or two from this. If you did, please feel free to comment that down below so that people can read through it. We highly appreciate your likes and subscribe to the channel for future episodes so that you're gonna get access to those videos, and also hit the notification bell so that you're notified when the next videos come up. We try to upload videos every Wednesdays and Saturdays, so please tune in. And thank you once again for a great first live stream. And I hope to do this in the next time with all of you. So thanks and have a great rest of your weekend.